Hi, and welcome to OTH Sports View. I'm Chuck Pollock, Times Herald sports editor, and we're about halfway through the college basketball non-conference aspect of the season for St. Bonaventure's teams. And since last we met, there have been some pretty good developments for both squads. On my right is Jeff Madigan, who covers the women's team, and on my left, in his 9th season with the men, is J.P. Butler, and we'll talk about the women first. Jeff, the last time we were sitting here, Bona's women's team was 1-3, and it looked like you were going to be writing about a lot of losses. Bang comes a trip to Florida, a tense but good win over Austin Peay, a win over Ryder, both winning teams coming in, and all of a sudden, kind of a nice kickstart into the last half of the non-conference season.
Absolutely. That's a great trip for them down in Florida. You know, they've won 2 games in a row now. The men's team has won 2 games in a row now. The Bills have won 2 games in a row now. JP told me his fantasy football team has won 2 games in a row now. So it's a pretty good time around these parts right now. But like I said, great trip down to Florida for the women's team. Thanksgiving trip down to Orlando. I wish I could have spent my time down there. It was about 40 degrees warmer down there than it was here, but it was a business trip. Coach Fleming told me they had their fun. They had Thanksgiving dinner Thursday night. They went out Friday night mini golfing, and then yesterday, Sunday after the win, they went to Disney World. So they had a fun trip down there, but it's what made it a whole lot more fun is that they won 2 games.
Matea's hometown is Orlando, so they actually had Thanksgiving dinner at a player's house. That's a pretty good bonding experience, but what's interesting to me is in these last 2 games, we've seen a major change personnel-wise in the starting lineup, and it would appear to be for the better.
Yeah, well, so far, Jaleisha Terry was inserted into the starting lineup against Delaware, and it wasn't her greatest game. She's only a freshman, but the Bonnies played much better defensively in that game than they had probably in any game that they've played this season, save for the exhibition. But so far, it's worked out great, and she had one heck of a trip down there. She played 68 of 80 total minutes, 34 minutes each game. She committed only 2 fouls, and for a freshman, 2 fouls, and she's not the tallest girl in the world, so she's playing great basketball. She had double-digit points both games, so she's really impressed so far. And it's Coach Fleming told me as long as she keeps playing like that, she's going to see a lot. She's going to be seeing 34, 35 minutes a game.
One of the things that tips me over on that is her play has pushed a former contributor and Imani back to the bench, which tells me he's got a lot of confidence. And what really stuck out to me, Jeff, in the last box score was that Jaleisha had 1 turnover, and she was a turnover machine in the first couple of games.
Well, that's part of being a freshman. When you start, you're kind of adjusting to the Division I level. But like I said, she's played great. Sarah Hart has played great, another freshman right there, and it's really given Coach Fleming depth, which he didn't really have at the beginning of the year with just five freshmen on the bench. And with Terry playing so well, with Hart playing so well, even Migliori coming off the bench is playing pretty well. I mean, this is a team right now that's a whole heck of a lot more well-rounded than it was the last time we talked when they were 1-3 last week.
One of the things that's interesting too, and you alluded to this before, and it seems to be bearing fruit each game. McKenna Maycock almost seems to be a better player off the bench.
She is, and she was last year certainly. And her yesterday, Sunday's game was her best outing of the season, with 10 points coming off the bench, and that's her role, and that's what her role is going to be. And she was thrust into the starting lineup when the season began. I don't know if Coach Fleming wanted to do that, but with Sarah Hart being a freshman, he didn't want to push her in there right away. And now that Hart has played so well, it has pushed McKenna to the bench. And with McKenna and Imani on the bench, that's 2 veteran players on the bench he can go to if either Jaleisha or Sarah get in foul trouble, which hasn't been an issue thus far.
So my final question. On Wednesday night comes an opponent, Stony Brook, where there's a lot of interaction between the 2 teams as far as history.
Yeah, Coach Fleming was an assistant coach at Stony Brook in the 2011-2012 season. That happened to be the season that the Bonnies went to the NCAA tournament, so he missed that by a year because he left the Bonnies after the 10-11 season to go to Stony Brook. And Coach, Andrea Mulcahy, then Andrea Donath, followed him. She was the director of operations that year at Stony Brook. That season, Stony Brook was 4-26 that year, and I'm going to allude to this in Wednesday's preview story that They both left after that year. Coach Fleming went to Bowling Green. Andy Donath came back here to be an assistant coach where she's been the last 5 years, I believe, is the math there. And Coach Fleming told me that one of the women's assistant coaches was one of the men's assistant coaches when he was there, so they're pretty good friends. So it's a lot of interaction, like you mentioned, that he was there at Stony Brook, and it's going to be, hopefully it'll be a good game Wednesday night, and it's a doubleheader, so you'll get more fans than you usually would with all the students coming back. And with the men's game, and you'll talk about this in just a couple minutes, the Sienna, so the Franciscan Cup's on the line and all that, and the Bonnies want to win that back.
And speaking of the men and the doubleheader on Wednesday night, we'll talk next with J.P. Butler about the men's squad. J.P., the last time we were here, we talked a little bit about moral victories. We agree that you can have them, coaches don't. And that was after they had played, the Bonnies had played the University of Florida in Lakeland. Well, they came back, made that trip to the Lone Star Shootout, or whatever, the showcase, I guess they called it.
Right.
But they opened with a loss to a very, very good team from last season, Arkansas Little Rock, lost by 3. I know that Mark Schmidt was not happy, but then they came back and won 2 impressive games against Central Michigan and Pepperdine. And I'm sorry, but I look at that Arkansas Little Rock game as a moral victory.
Well, I think it can be looked at that way. The interesting thing with the 2 games they lost, and they lose to Florida, and then a couple of days later they come into that Lone Star Shootout, lose to Arkansas Little Rock. All of a sudden they're 1-2 to start the season. It's not a great feeling. The thing with that is both of those teams are very good teams. Florida is actually now in the top 25 officially this week. The AP ballot actually just came out this morning. Arkansas Little Rock, I wouldn't be surprised if they're hovering in that neighborhood throughout the season. So it's not like it was 2 bad losses by any stretch of the imagination. But what it was is 2 missed opportunities, I think. And I don't want to just thrust it on this year's team that, they're going to do what last year's team did, and on March 1st we're going to be talking about the bubble and maybe making the NCAA tournament and all those things. I just think it's too early on November 28th to be talking about those things. But if it does get to that point, it will kind of be a situation like last year where maybe they look back and see the 2 missed opportunities in the non-conference season. That's what, as we know, the committee looked at last year as a reason for being left out because of not really beating, anybody in the non-conference season. And so there's really, 2 ways to look at it. It's 2 not bad losses, but 2 missed opportunities. But I do think that they made up for it in a way by what they did in these next 2 games in that Lone Star Shootout.
Still, and from my perspective, if you take your Sharpie and go down the schedule, you do it, 5 games in, a reasonable assumption is they're going to be 3-2 at this point.
Or I would have at least thought that they would have had a loss to this point. I thought it was asking maybe a little much to just go in there and sweep their way through that thing, especially playing 3 solid mid-major teams on a neutral court away from the Riley Center. And so at least a loss. But, I think the good thing is they have a chance to be 5-0, right now. And so they've got to, be pretty happy about that aspect of it. And really just the way they played in the next 2 games in wins over Central Michigan and Pepperdine. I was able to talk to Mark Schmidt after both of those games, and I know he wants to point to an improved effort, in taking care of the ball and on the boards and on defense and things like that. We know those are the things he likes to, point to, and those are the key things that they shoot for every game. But it was really just the offense and how good the offense was, and now looks like it might be going forward, that really stood out, in that victory. And I think it'll be a lot like last year, where they're going to have one of the better offenses and ability to score of anybody in the A-10, again this year.
One of the things that we talked about before, and my guess is it'll be a theme all year, the one thing, if you're going to be a critic of what's happened through the first 5 games, there still is kind of an uneven performance from the front court.
Yeah, I mean, that part of it, I think, is just going to be coming along. It's just going to take some time. Again, it's almost like last year, where you have such an established backcourt, and it's early, it's only 5 games in, but I really do think that Jalen Adams and Matt Mobley are establishing themselves as one of the best, if not the best backcourt in the A-10 again. I mean, what these guys have done, the last two games, they've gone for 45, 44 plus points in both games. They're both just been hot from three-point range. Mobley in particular has just been so good in these first couple of games. He had 24, 10, and 6 just the last time out. They have these established pieces, and then it's just going to be bringing kind of the younger guys and, in particular the front court guys along, just like it was last year with Derek Woods and Jordan Tyson. But they did prove that last year you can get by, while you're doing that. You can still have a lot of success while you're doing that. Josh Annie's had 2 good games in a row now after really kind of being put back into his place against Florida as a freshman. He had 9 points against Central Michigan and then 10 against Pepperdine. And so they're coming, I think. Madi Pizzi has given them some stuff inside. Even Mboko last game was a little bit better, at least on the defensive end inside. And so I think they're coming along, but it's really going to start and end with this backcourt, just the way it was, in these last 2 games.
Right. Last question. People around here, because of the league it's in and because of the Franciscan tie, they kind of use the Siena game as a yardstick, and the Bonnies haven't fared particularly well against that Loudonville-based team.
Well, it's interesting. So they've had the Franciscan Cup in place for 6 years now. Bona won the first 3 in that series, and so for a while this was just something that Bona owned. It was just kind of a foregone conclusion that they were going to leave with that Franciscan Cup. But now they've lost 3 in a row, and this isn't to the same degree yet, but it's almost, the feeling in these last 3 years. Jimmy Patsos has been on the Siena sideline. We remember this guy from his time at Loyola, now at Siena. He's just a very animated guy. He makes the press conferences all about him. He's not ashamed to do that. Last year they played at Christmas time. He came in a Santa hat and just held court. I'm trying to do my story, and he's just going on and on and on with a Santa hat on. It's almost become a little bit of a thing. He's had Bona's number, and he's had Schmidt's number over these last few years, similar to the way Joe Mahalik did at Niagara, although again not to that extent yet. And this will be a tough game for Bona on Sunday. Siena was a borderline top 100 team last year. They bring all 5 starters back who started that game against Bona last year, led by the guards Marquise Wright and forward Levon Long. This is going to be this will be a good win to have at the end of the year, because I suspect that Siena will be in the top 100 again. They're only 2-4 right now, kind of underachieving a little bit out of the gate, but they're good. And for me, this is a game that, even though it's against a pretty good Siena team, you have to win it because it's at home, and because you're trying to snap this 3-game losing streak, to get back on track against this kind of rival now. This is a game that you absolutely have to win, being here. Siena won here last time they played here 2 years ago. All these guys were sophomores. Now they're back as seniors. But this is a game that Bona has to win if they're going to have the season that we think they might be capable of going forward.
Hopefully, when we're back next week, we'll have a victory over the Saints to talk about. We'll see you next week on OTH Sports View.